It's time for the No Nonsense Roundtable. Insights to capture your imagination from people you know and people you'd like to know about. Each week, a different guest from a different walk of life. Now, here is the host of the No Nonsense Roundtable, Dom Genova.
Well, good morning, everybody. You're listening to another edition of the No Nonsense Roundtable. I'm here with a special guest, a gentleman who's been on the show a couple of times before, and a guest that I think, well, most of you know, Mr. Scott Pitoniak. Scott, good to have you today.
Hey, always great being with you, Dom. I always enjoy this.
Well, you are best known as a sports writer, but you're more than a sports writer. I mean, you write a lot of books, you give lectures and whatever. But for those people who don't know, let's give a little background about, well, who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm still a sports writer. I still write a sports column for a weekly sports column now for the Rochester Business Journal. But my background was coming to Rochester as a sports writer for the Rochester Democrat Chronicle. Did that for 25 years. Covered the Buffalo Bills, 5 Olympics, a bunch of World Series, and a bunch of Super Bowls, and yes, all 4 losses by the Bills. That was my main background and reason coming here. But I've always tried to, I guess, our mutual late great friend Jack Garner gave me, I think one of my favorite compliments was that he said, "You're not a sports writer, you're a people writer." And that's what I've always tried to do. I mean, yeah, there are times when I get in the nuts and bolts of a game or whatever, but I've always been more fascinated by the stories of, the people wearing the helmets, the people behind the catcher's mask or whatever. I wanted to get to know them as human beings. So that's, I guess, kind of what I've tried to do. I fancy myself as a storyteller, and it's just so happens that many of the stories I've told have involved people who, play sports.
Well, and a prolific book writer. I mean, how many books have you written? I
think I'm up around 27. I just we finished up a novel, my first novel, historical novel, with a friend of mine who's a professor at Syracuse University. So we're kind of in the process right now of pitching it, and hopefully we'll get that.
Can you tell me what it's about?
I can't really get into it now because I'd have to kill you. No. It involves a pioneering African-American athlete who was decades and decades ahead of his time. And he also happened to be a brilliant student, college student, graduated in zoology and was going to go into the same field as his late father and stepdad did, and that was the field of medicine. And he also was a patriot. He was one of the original members of the Tuskegee Airmen and was killed during World War II. So he's a pretty fascinating character, and despite all those things, he's a forgotten figure in history. And that's another thing, Dom, that has always appealed to me. I've always loved stories that uncover people or events that have been forgotten that should be remembered. So this particular character fills all those boxes, and it's told as a historical novel because there's not a lot of depth in terms of conversations that he had or whatever. So I had to get those work around the fringes, so to speak.
So so far, this show is like 3 minutes and 36 seconds long, and there are people out there who are wondering why I haven't asked you about Sunday's Bills game yet. Well, can you tell me? You think of that song "High Hopes," right?
Yeah.
What the heck went on?
Well, I think a couple things went on. Number one, the Pittsburgh Steelers are not a bad football team. That was a tough, good, challenging opening game for them. So, particularly defensively, that's going to be one of the best defenses that the Bills face all year. Probably Tampa might have a better defense, and the Bills are going to have to play them later this year. So there's that. I also sensed from Josh Allen that he was a little too hyped up, and so he's overthrowing guys. He was not very accurate. It was a little bit unnerving and reminiscent of the Josh Allen of 2 years ago as opposed to the Josh Allen last year who was, runner-up for the MVP in the NFL. So there's such tremendous expectations for this season. Probably these were the highest expectations we felt here in Western New York since the 90s, the Jim Kelly era. And you had fans back in the stands, for a full house for the first time in nearly 2 years. So you had a lot of things going on there that really drove the energy level up, and then you lay an egg like that. But, you see a lot of stuff on social media, and you hear on the talk shows and whatever, and just calm down, Bills Mafia. Everything's going to be okay. It's like it's really too early to panic. And you know what? I can say now, there's 16 more games to be played because this is the first year you're playing 17 games in the NFL. So I had to talk a few people off the ledge, and say it's okay. And no, this is not back to the drought years and the 2-14 and all these, quarterbacks who have long since been erased from our memories and so forth. So it'll be okay. It's early. It's very early.
It's okay. It's almost like some of the fans just cashing in their chips right now. It's we're back. We're back to it. We're back to it's in a Buffalo thing, and it's been earned. Because of all the curses and so forth through the years, and all the heartbreaks and that sort of thing. But it's almost like embedded in our DNA to worry like that. But now if this were to continue, then now you got to start to worry about, was this a fluke last year? I don't think so. I think Josh was a little too hyped up, to be honest with you, and he needs to calm it down. And plus, they got a lot of pressure on him. The Steelers were able to do that, and I think he was off target as a result. Well, nobody expects a block kick, too.
Yeah. Well, this was the Bills. The Bills played very poorly. The coach, as Sean McDermott mentioned and acknowledged, they were out-coached. They didn't do a good job preparing his team for this. And there were some coaching decisions that I questioned as well. So it was, all across the board. This was it was a failing grade. There's no question about it. They laid an egg on opening day, with this opener that was probably more anticipated since maybe when the Bills were getting ready to start that season when they went to their second Super Bowl. So.
And there were some predictions of before the game of who they're going to be playing in the Super Bowl. I mean, come on, guys.
Yeah. It's a little premature. I mean, I think that they have the makeup, to contend and go and win it all. I really do. I like everything about them, but they're still a work in progress. And until they show us that they can go toe to toe with the Kansas City Chiefs, which they haven't shown us that yet. They were handled by them twice last season. And then, beyond that, the delectable matchup, and if there are true football gods finally smiling on the Buffalo Bills, they'll play Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl, and they will exercise that ghost of Tom Brady and beat him finally after he's dominated them so long.
You're listening to the No Nonsense Roundtable. I'm Dom Genova, your host, every Saturday 10 to 11 on News Radio Wham 1180. I'm here with a good friend, good guy, a great author, lecturer, Mr. Scott Pitoniak. And what he does is he is a sports writer mainly, but he also writes some very compelling books. 27, did you say?
I think I'm around 27 right now.
My God, how do you have the time to do that? I don't think I've read 27 books.
There were a couple of years I actually pumped out, 2 or 3 books in a single year. And
wow.
I was working full time, at the DNC as a columnist at the time and also being a father and a husband. So it was pretty crazy, but I don't have that energy level anymore.
Now, let me ask you a question about the creative process with that. I mean, do you go sequester yourself someplace and just do nothing but that for a while? Some authors have done that. I think they said Walt Whitman had a little cabin. He just stuck himself there.
Yeah,
is that what you do? Or?
Yeah, I wish I did, but there's this thing that constantly interrupts you, and it's called life. You know, I mean, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a grandfather, and all those things are important to me. And
God bless you.
Yeah, so and then I've got other work to do. I always wondered what it would be like if I I got some huge advance and I could just go sit down in the woods in my cabin and write, and there's a waterfalls in the background. But that's not the way it works. So, but you do have to, writing is very much a one-on-one thing, and it's you and the screen. In the old days, it was actually me and a typewriter.
A typewriter, right.
Like in ripping papers up now, and it's a lot easier to delete and cut and paste now than it used to be. But you have to be laser focused. And so what I would try to do and still do on books that I'm working on, Dom, is I just got to carve out a certain amount of time. I'm not answering emails for a while. I'm not answering the phone unless it's my wife or, my kids or whatever. And you got to really just, kind of discipline yourself to do it. It's so easy. I'll tell you, one of the worst enemies of a writer is procrastination and distraction. I can be easily distracted and I can easily put things off, especially when you get into areas where you can't, you hit writer's block.
And you have things to do, like go to Cooperstown and hear Mr. Jeter give his acceptance speech. So was it last week or the week before?
Yeah, it was last.
That must have been something.
Yeah.
Do you get because you're a writer? Do you get to sit right up front?
No, you don't get right up front. The photographers are up front. What happens is you've got the stage, then just beneath the stage, below the stage, you have usually a bay where the photographers are, and then you have the VIP section, and then you have the media, and then you have all the fans and stuff. And in the VIP section, for example, for Jeter, Michael Jordan's there. Patrick Ewing's there.
Yeah.
People like that. His former teammates, Jorge Posada. And Mariano Rivera, of course, was up on the stage, the other living Hall of Famers and stuff. So, it's a pretty cool gig. And you can, what's great is in those settings, you can talk to people about the inductees. I remember several years ago, Joe Torre was going in. So you go to the VIP section, and this is, obviously you can only do these interviews before the festivities start. And Billy Crystal was there. And, of course, Billy Crystal is an enormous Yankee fan. And so you can go and, you talk to them about Mr. Torre, as Derek Jeter called him and so forth. So, it's a pretty cool gig. It's usually the best day of the year for baseball in my mind, because you got all these Hall of Famers coming back. This was different. Dom, this was the Derek Jeter thing. We didn't know if it was even going to happen. It was postponed, obviously. Last year was when he was technically inducted. And then with COVID, everything was canceled. And then it was canceled again this year, if you remember, when the numbers were still high. And then they said, wait a minute, we're going to try to have this in September. And I'm so thankful that they were, because, they had probably about, I think, 25,000 people there, which is pretty good for, first day of many people going back to school and in middle of the week and just after the Labor Day weekend to come up there. And it's not an easy place to get to. There's 2-lane roads going in. But, it was, if we didn't have COVID and this was held when it was supposed to be held in late July of 2020, they would have broke the record. They would have had 100,000 people descend upon this little village of 2,500.
I hear he gave a heck of a speech.
Yeah, he was, we have come to expect from Derek Jeter for him to rise to the moments. He did it throughout his career, whether it was the flip or diving into the stands and bloodying himself.
I was there for that.
Were you there for that?
Yeah.
Wow. What there's moments, right? When you think back to Derek Jeter,
absolutely.
Mr. November, hits the home run after 9/11, and once again he rose to the occasion, and we shouldn't be surprised. He gave a wonderful speech. He hit all the right notes with the speech, and I wouldn't have expected anything else. And the other great thing, Dom, was there was a real threat of rain. There were kind of these storm clouds were circling, and they had the Doppler going to make sure. And then a couple speeches droned on before him, and everybody was there for Derek. The rain held off because it was Derek Jeter, right? And then there was a cloudburst about an hour after he finished his speech.
What's the most poignant thing he said?
I don't know if I can pick out any particular one thing. I think the thing that there was a tremendous amount of humility that came out in him. Well, I think the two most poignant things I think he said was he talked about when he was a young player with the Yankees, and he was at the baseball writers dinner in New York, which is a big deal. And he said, he goes, and I was sitting next to this elegant lady throughout the dinner, and I was as nervous as can be. and I don't remember anything I said that night, but I just remember like being in the presence of Rachel Robinson, Jackie Robinson's widow. And then later he mentioned about at an All-Star game, I believe it was the All-Star game in Fenway Park, and being with, near Hank Aaron. And he said during his speech, Derek did, that he wanted to always make sure that, the way he played the game, the way he comported himself would have made Jackie proud and made Hank proud. And I thought that was, and I think he lived up to that throughout his career.
So a couple of weeks ago, I had Naomi Silver on the show, and she was talking about Cal Ripken Jr., and she said something about him. It sounds like exactly what you're talking about. Said Cal Ripken Jr. had an essence of what he meant to the game.
Yes.
Yeah. So it wasn't just about him and his statistics, what he meant to the game and how he wanted to be remembered.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of similarities between he and Derek. Besides, the position of shortstop. I think, one of the things they talked about was just like respecting the game, play the game, carry yourself in a certain way that, you represent all that came before and all that come after.
Right. And that's the thing about baseball. People remember statistics and moments from years and years and years ago, like they don't in very many other sports. You're listening to No Nonsense Roundtable. I'm Dom Genova, your host, every Saturday from 10 to 11 here on News Radio Wham 1180. And at the bottom of the hour, I always like to shout out to the Bob Johnson Auto Group, who now owns Genesee Valley Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Genesee Valley Ford in Avon, the dealerships I used to own. And they own a bevy of other car dealers around Rochester, and good people to deal with, all the brands that you could ever want, and great deals and great service. So again, sponsoring my show, and me very grateful that they do. Now I'm here with Scott Pitoniak, author, lecturer, sportswriter, and we were talking at the break about 9/11. You have a heck of a 9/11 story about one of our Bills players.
Yeah, Dom, it involves a former reserve running back for the Bills from their AFL championship teams in the mid-1960s. And Doug Goodwin would never have lived. Doug, later in life, had developed some heart problems, and he lived in the New York City area, and he became a candidate. The only way that he was going to continue to live was to have a heart transplant. In the wee hours of the morning of September 11th, 2001, he gets a phone call saying, "We have a heart for you." The person had died in an accident in Boston. They said, "You need to get to the hospital right now, and we need to begin preparations for you to have this transplant." Meantime, this plane is leaving from Boston, a private jet, flying into Peterborough, New Jersey, across the bridge, the George Washington Bridge. So we all know that there were two other planes that were coming from Boston, two airliners that were hijacked and turned into bombers, essentially, that crashed into the World Trade Center that morning. So this plane actually landed right around the same time. And if you remember, there was so much chaos going on, they didn't know what was, so the New York Port Authority began shutting down all the bridges and tunnels going into New York City. And the last vehicle that crossed the GW, the George Washington Bridge, was this ambulance that was carrying this heart that was going to be transplanted into the chest and save the life of this former Buffalo Bill, Doug Goodwin. Now, Doug didn't know what was going on because he was already sedated by that point. At New York Presbyterian, about 5 miles north of where all this tragedy is occurring in lower Manhattan, they're transplanting this heart, saving his life. And had that plane not arrived when it did, if it was 5 minutes later in Peterborough, that heart never would have made it across the bridge, and in all likelihood, Doug Goodwin would never have lived. He told me this story. He's coming to regain his consciousness in the recovery room. The drugs or anesthesia's wearing off, and there's a TV in there. And he's seeing all these scenes that seem surreal and like he said, was like some sci-fi movie or whatever. And it's real life of the planes crashing into the towers and the towers pancaking to the ground and, 2,000 plus people being killed. and when the nurse finally explains to him later on what happens, he's like just in shock. But he will, like many transplant patients, he celebrates two different birthdays, his natural birth and the day that he received his new heart. But he also says, he always feels a certain amount of guilt, particularly on 9/11, because so many died at a time when he was given life. But it's truly a story that was miraculous when you think about like the doctors I talked to, his cardiologists and surgeons and whatever. Everything, that timeline
had to hit
perfectly, or he doesn't make it. And then he becomes another victim, you think, of 9/11.
Yeah.
But yet instead he becomes a miracle from 9/11.
Well, let's change the subject just a little bit. Since we're talking about the Bills, let's continue talking about the Bills, but not about the Bills. Let's talk about the stadium.
The stadium.
The stadium.
The $1.4 billion question here.
Do you happen to have an opinion about this?
I have a few opinions.
Okay.
I'll preface everything by saying, Dom, that I never ever want to see the Bills leave the area. I understand probably more intimately than most, because I've covered the team since 1985. What this is not a football team. This is part of our DNA in Western New York. Yeah. Even if you don't follow football or whatever, it is a source of tremendous pride. It's a source that brings us together, particularly in these polarizing times when we're dealing with so much. Here's the one thing we can go to and we can agree upon. That here we're rooting for our community. We're rooting for our region with this team. So I'll start out by that. By the same token, I have some real issues when you have owners, Terry and Kim Pegula, who are they're valued at their net worth is valued at somewhere around $5 billion. That's with a B, $1 billion, and they want this to be primarily, from what I can gather, a publicly funded stadium. And I think that's tone deaf, given what we're going through right now, where there's a lot of people suffering, that are struggling to pay mortgages, pay rent, facing evictions. And there's just a lot of issues out there that I really think the public taxpayer dollar should be going to. I mean, I didn't get into like lesser important things, but important to all of us, like, infrastructure, bridges collapsing, roads crumbling, school systems in dire need of resources and so forth and whatever. So, when you look at the issue, the last, I think, 21 new stadiums built in the NFL they've all been, this public-private partnership, but the average is about 50-50.
Okay.
And when you you dig into this deeper, drill deeper, and you find that in the larger markets, usually there's fewer public dollars being used. Smaller markets, the average, I think, is around 73% of the bill is footed by taxpayers' dollars and stuff. Again, I don't have a problem like with any endeavor that creates jobs and community spirit and so forth. That's okay. We can use some private dollars or public dollars for that. But I don't know. And beyond, like I mentioned, the worth of the Pegulas, but the NFL has a lot of money too. It's a $16 billion a year industry. Can't they get together a stadium fund and when we have these issues, instead of what we always have to face, the threat that you're going to move the team, or the league is going to move the team.
Well, that's the problem I have with these endeavors sometimes, is that you feel like you're being extorted.
Yes. That's a great word. And I've believe me, I've been through a number of these threats before. I've been through reported on a number of stadium lease issues and so forth. So this is not the first time we've been through this, and I just don't like where it's going. And what's going to be difficult too is we've got a political year coming up here, and Kathy Hochul, a woman from Buffalo, does not want to see them leave on her watch. But by the same token, she's got some other issues to deal with too.
So one of the famous people in Rochester, Dan Mason, before a game starts, says, "And let's have some fun, right?" And I'm going to pose some questions to you. Shout out something to you. You give me your first impression. Pete Rose.
Charlie Hustle, on and off the field.
Okay. Hustle. I like that. It's a double entendre. Yeah. Stupidest sport.
Stupidest. Tiddlywinks.
Is that really a sport?
I don't know.
That's a game.
People talk about...
I'll give you a suggestion. Curling. You like curling.
Yeah, I like curling. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of camaraderie there and looks like a good beer drinking sport.
Well, I get Joe Buck.
No, terrible. Father was great.
Yeah.
Father was great.
Let me give you a suggestion. Talks too much.
Talks too much, and I also he's kind of smarmy. He comes across as kind of smarmy. I'm sorry. I just I guess announcers are like acquired tastes, and I guess writers are too.
Well, you get to bond with some of them too. I remember back in the day when I was when I was a young man, Red Barber. Yeah, I mean, you're a Yankee fan. Yeah, Phil Rizzuto and Mel Allen, right?
Yeah. How about that? They come into our living rooms and talk to us. They're like a relative, a member of the family.
Yogi Berra.
Malapropisms, but salt of the earth, and a true American hero. He really is.
What's your favorite Yogi-ism?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one, Dom. There's books have been written about him. Well, there was a great story about John Lindsay, the former mayor of New York.
Yeah, that's a good one. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so it's a really, really hot day at this reception, and Yogi's there, I guess, and some of the other Yankees. And so Mrs. Lindsay is there, and I guess Yogi was dressed in a nice golf shirt and everything, and said you're looking pretty cool there, Mr. Berra. And he said, "You don't look so hot yourself." No, he didn't mean to say that, but it's great. And and Yogi, he could go people would ask, "What time is it?" And he'd say to Mickey Mantle, and he'd say "You mean right now?" Well, no, I mean what time is it? 10. He was a great guy. I got to interview him and go on a personal tour of his museum. So
I'll give you my. I'll tell you my favorite. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded.
Yeah,
but there was a reason for that. The neighborhood bar that they used to frequent got inundated with tourists, and so his guys never went there anymore.
Yeah, if you think about it, Dom, with malapropism, there's an element of truth in them, but they're just so humorous.
And he's supposedly a really great guy with a great family. And as far as word association goes, so Jack Buck goes to him one day. He says, "We're going to do word association when we go back on the air," and he goes to Yogi. He goes, "Mickey Mantle," and Yogi goes, "What about him?"
Yeah, that's Yogi.
Word association. Yeah. Will video games ever be in the Olympics?
Probably. I'm not saying I advocate it. I just, I guess I'm just getting old. I don't get it, but I don't see it.
Umpires replaced by technology.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I think we're moving
see that coming.
Way. Yeah, I really think. I mean, if you watch the strike zones.
Yeah.
These guys are. I can't believe how off they are. It would be one thing. We all make mistakes and human error, but I think at some point here, if these guys can't get it right more often, I can see them being replaced.
Well, when the ball's coming at you at 100 miles an hour, you can't judge it yourself at all. I mean,
right.
So. Yeah. Now, how can you tell if it's a quarter inch outside the strike zone? I'm
not saying I like that, just like I'm not a big proponent of replay and so forth. It's become a travesty. It slows games down, not just baseball, but in everything. But I think we're kind of moving in that direction. Okay,
let's continue to have some more fun. What's the strangest thing you've ever seen? At least one of them.
The strangest story I ever covered probably was it involved Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. I'm out covering the U.S. figure skating championships. I'm out of my league. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm writing about people again. So I had seen some stories about this Tanya Harding who could take a car engine apart. She just didn't fit the stereotype of the figure skater. So I'm at Cobo Arena in Detroit. She gets some of their practice session, and she's going fairly quickly toward the locker room, and I say, Tanya, I'm Scott Pitoniak. I'm covering for Gannett News Service and USA Today. I got maybe 2 questions in, and you can tell somebody doesn't want to do an interview, so she goes right into her locker room. So I go back up to the media room, and I'm kind of ticked off because I had it all planned. I had studied and get done my homework and this and that. Now I got to come up with a new column. And another reporter comes back, and she had just been there and witnessed the hacking of Nancy Kerrigan, on the knee there. And, why me, why me? Well, little did we know while we were in Detroit, and this didn't really come out until next week of what really happened. And that was, of course, this was a hit job, And then I wound up covering that in Lillehammer. That was my first Olympic experience.
Oh, my God.
I got this, the most bizarre sports story of the 20th century. I got a front row seat to it, But I was the last person to ask Tanya Harding a question before
it happened.
All the stuff happened, so that was pretty bizarre.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, here's a question for you. Can you watch Field of Dreams without crying?
No. No, I can't.
No, I can't either.
I can't. Again, it's obviously a movie that goes well beyond baseball. It's about fathers and sons, and when Costner's character Ray Kinsella asks, like, "Dad, want to have a catch?" Yeah, I lose it.
Yeah, I lose it too.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. I think what hits it for me is that when Kevin Costner says, "I only knew my dad when he was old," and he was beaten down by life. He says, "I didn't see the young dad."
Yeah.
And he got to meet the young dad. And we all feel that way. The disappointments we gave our fathers, and we wish we could go back, and now that they're gone, you can't. And I can't. I cry like a baby.
Yeah, there's no mulligans.
It's not, it's really not a baseball movie.
No, it's not. And it's to me, it's like It's a Wonderful Life. There's another one, like I cry at the end, because we all go through these feelings and stuff. In case of that movie, you got to see like what impact you had on a ripple effect on so many lives. Like, and we all do that. We all have that.
I think you're right about that. Well, and you got your first byline from the Rome Daily Sentinel back when you were 18, so it's been a long career.
Yeah, it has been, and this kid from Rome, New York, I've been blessed. I really have, I fulfilled my dreams here of being able to do what I wanted to for a living. So I can't be more grateful.
Well, it's a delight seeing you again. Unfortunately we have to go, but I have to get you back soon.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. And again, every Saturday, 10 to 11, and we'll see you next Saturday here on News Radio WHAM 1180, and always on the NoNonsenseRoundtable.com, where you can find any of our previous shows. And if you'd like to suggest a guest, you can go onto NoNonsenseRoundtable.com and contact Dom. It's right there. So we'll see you next week at the same time, and have a good week.